Hey everybody, it is Professor Parish, and we are on week 6 of English 122. So this video is pretty important because I'm going to be going over some very important items, so please make sure you watch it all the way through. I don't know how long this video will be, but I am going to talk about our assignments for this week, kind of leading us into the rest of the class. And then we'll also talk about this Mla Citation Presentation at the very end. So I've had a couple students ask if I'd go over the presentation. So that's what I'm going to do at the end of this video. But first, I want to kind of come down here, and we're at week 6. So I'm recording this Saturday night. So if you've not turned in the assignments for week 5, you've got till tomorrow. Make sure you get that paper number 3 in. It's worth 100 points. It's worth a lot. Make sure you get it in. But as far as this class goes, this week, the next 2 weeks will not have nearly as many assignments as this week. This is kind of our last big week in the class. You've got 4 assignments, and then from here on in, I think next week only has 3 assignments, and then there is 4 for the finals week, but it's not anything crazy. So let's talk about week 6. You've got 4 assignments. You have your thesis and outline for paper 4 due, reading response, the drama exam, and the discussion forum for week 6. And I'm going to go over the paper 4 guidelines. This is very important, so please make sure you watch when I go over those paper 4 guidelines. So just real quick, talking about the drama exam. It's listed on here. I can't access it right now because it's not open yet for you all. But the drama exam basically, we'll come back to that. The drama exam basically is set up the exact same way our poetry and short story exams have been. It's just going to be dealing with drama. There's a couple questions. Some are short answers, some are not. And it's not timed. You can take your time on it, but it shouldn't take you very long to do. It's a pretty short exam, right? But it's due by Sunday as well. So then, yeah, let's talk about paper 4's guidelines. Let me bring that up here. Where your assignments are the drama exam, the reading response, your thesis and outline, and discussion forum. Let's go ahead and talk about your thesis and outline is going to come after you read these paper guidelines here. All right, let me say first and foremost, this is like the capstone project of our class. For many of you, this will probably be the last English class you take in college. Isn't that exciting? For me, I'd be like, I want to take like 20 more. But if you're not an English major or a communications major, this may very well be the last English class you ever take in college. So why not go out with a bang, right? So this is a very special assignment. It is not like it's probably unlike any paper you've ever written before. And so there are lots of options for it. I try to give some creative writing options as well as out-of-the-box ideas, but you have 3 weeks to work on this starting that Sunday this week opens. So I want to give you plenty of time to work on it and to kind of talk about your options. So step 1 is to decide which genre of literature you want to focus on. Did you like short story? Did you like poetry? Or did you like drama the best? Which genre of literature did you kind of want to write more about, right? So that'll be step 1, is figuring out if you want to do a short story, poetry, or a play analyses or creative writing piece for this final paper. So the next step is choosing your prompt. So you'll notice down here below, if you have out-of-the-box ideas like creative writing, you can email me specifically or include that in your thesis topic and outline assignment, and we can talk about it there. But these 4 options are ones that have worked for students in the past and have made some really, really cool papers. And so I include them on there. The very first option is pretty standard. It's just to research an analysis of an author's fiction, a poet's poetry, or a playwright's screenplay history, and how their style and craft has developed over time. This is not a biography. A biography, you talk about that author's life. That's not this assignment. Rather, what this assignment does is I want you to look at their writing that they've done and how has it changed over time and how has its developed style been altered over time as well. So I've had students do like Stephen King. I've had them do Robert Frost. Somebody did Emily Dickinson. I've had them do some modern poets, some modern playwrights, talking about like maybe Taika Waititi as a playwright, like that idea, who's done Thor Ragnarok, who's done Our Flag Means Death, like other series like that. So you've got lots of options, but if you want to do like a specific author and how their style and writing has changed over time, you can choose option 1. That's option 1. Option 2 is to choose a controversy within the genre that you picked. So for example, one of my favorite papers that I've gotten out of this class is a student looked at Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And we find out in the paper that Harper Lee, she actually had a manuscript for a sequel novel to Kill a Mockingbird. It was called Go Set a Watchman. But Harper Lee didn't like the script, so she never published it. And so her paper, the student's paper, was about how publishers essentially committed, they basically cornered this elderly woman. And Harper Lee at the time had some mental issues from her age. And they basically cornered her and made her publish the novel for money. And after she died, it was just like people that read the book was like, oh, this ruins To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't like this. It didn't get good reviews. I've not read it because after I read the student's paper, I was like, I'm not going to support something that Harper Lee clearly did not want, that she was forced to publish by her editors. And by the publishing company, they kind of badgered her until she did it. So that was a really cool paper. I've had another student write about Rocky Horror, should it be remade? Why or why not? And so that was a really cool paper. It was a lot of fun. It was for a fall semester, so it was right around Halloween when they started writing about it. It was a good time. But yeah, so you could choose a controversy within a genre, like banned books, things like that. I had a student write last semester about J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. So, there's a controversy about her and her opinions that she puts on Twitter. They wrote about that. It was interesting. So you can choose something like that. Then the third option is to analyze a piece of drama or fiction and how it's adapted into a different genre, like film. So probably one of my favorite pieces is that I had a student that looked at the film Batman vs. Superman when it came out, and they actually wrote about how Batman vs. Superman was based off of these different comic book stories and these comic book arcs. And they kind of talked about how Zack Snyder didn't want to adapt the comics directly and how it altered during the filmmaking process and the writing process. It was a really cool in-depth paper that didn't just tell me the plot of Batman vs. Superman because I had seen it at that point. Instead, it talked about the behind the scenes stuff leading up to its creation. And that was really cool. So you could do something like that, like when films are adapted from books. How do they change? What's the good and the bad of that? I know Where the Crawfish Sings just got adapted from a book. You could write about that. So that might be something that's up your alley. And then if you're not wanting to do anything crazy like that, if all of those options sound like they're going to be way too much, you can go simple. The simplest option is you can just do an extended analysis of a poem, piece of fiction, or a play. The only caveat is it cannot be the subject of a previous paper you've written. So if paper 3 was about Romeo and Juliet, you can't pick Romeo and Juliet for paper 4. You gotta choose something different, right? And then like I said, if you want to choose a creative writing option, you can, absolutely. Just let me know in the thesis and outline that that's what you're doing. So here is the thing that students usually freak out about. This paper's 8 pages long. It is our big capstone writing project. It is probably the longest paper you may write in your college career. It's fine. I know you can do it. You're very capable of doing this in 3 weeks. The main thing is I've kind of broke it down to help you figure out how you're going to cover that much material in 8 pages. And so the first thing is you do need a very detailed introduction where you explain your thesis, the goal of your paper, your points, what you plan to address, things like that. You'll need a section that explains your topic in a little more detail, gives some background information before you dive headfirst into the paper. And then in your paper, at some point, you need to discuss 3 terms or concepts from whatever chapters are covering the genre you picked. So if you decide that you're going to do an extended analysis on Robert Frost and his poetry, you chose option 1, and you're like, I'm going to do a paper about Robert Frost and how his poetry's changed over time. At some point in your paper, you need to talk about at least 3 terms and concepts from the poetry chapters. You can talk about how Robert Frost's imagery has changed in his poetry over time, maybe about how the pattern and rhyme scheme changed, maybe about how his use of symbolism and metaphor changed. That's 3 concepts right there. You could just do boom, 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 done in your paper. But at some point when I'm reading your paper, I need to be able to identify that you've talked about 3 concepts from the chapters discussing the genre that you picked, right? So for example, if you picked adapting a film or a movie from a book, then you need to talk about 3 terms and concepts from the short story chapters. Those need to be in there somewhere as well. And Finally, you need at least 4 sources cited in your paper. Now here's the deal. No Wikipedia. I won't count Wikipedia as a source because it's not. We'll talk about that in the MLA discussion in the presentation at the end of this video. But I will not count Wikipedia. If you put any wikis, like WikiHows, About.coms, any wiki sites or wiki blogs, I will not count them as sources and I will take off points. They are not sources. They are accumulations of sources that people have compiled together, but they are not a source themselves. If you want to use Wikipedia, just go to the bottom of the Wikipedia page and see the actual sources that the Wikipedia page is citing and cite those. But if I see any Wikipedia sources, I'm taking off a lot of points. So just be prepared, okay? You've heard it here. It's in black and white. Don't do it. So the paper should be an analysis, meaning that it is a synthesis of your words and ideas. It's not just a summary. It's not a book report. If you're planning to do an out-of-the-box assignment, talk to me about it in your thesis and outline assignment as well. You must have an MLA Works Cited page and in-text citations, even if you're doing an out-of-the-box project. And if you choose to do that, I'll explain to you how we'll go about getting you the points for that section. So the topic and outline is due this Sunday. The Sunday of July 25th, we'll talk about it in next week's video, but you're going to do like a peer review draft, and you have to review at least 2 of your fellow classmates and their papers. And then the final draft will be due in the Dropbox July 28th, which is a Thursday. So with that being said, the point breakdowns, since this is a twice as long paper, it's worth twice as many points. So your intro and conclusion are worth 20 points. The page length and formatting is worth 20 points. Spelling and grammar is 60. The content analysis is 60. The works cited in-text citations are 40 points. If you don't do this section, it's going to drop your paper to a B. I'm just going to tell you that right off the bat. So make sure you have a works cited page and in-text citations included. And then obviously, if you've got questions, I would make sure that in this thesis and outline assignment that you ask me those questions. So your thesis and outline assignment is you telling me that which topic you're choosing for this paper and constructing a skeletal outline of what you're going to do. Should be fairly basic, but this outline I feel will be very crucial in helping you write this paper. A lot of students are like, I don't even know where to start. And I'm like, well, the first step is making that outline, because I've written a lot of long papers before. My master's thesis was 107 pages, if you can believe it, and I wrote it in a semester. So it can be done. But yeah, the only way I stayed on track with my thesis was just having an outline that I could turn to when I got lost. I'd be like, okay, I'm getting way too off topic. How do I curve myself back? And that outline was crucial. So I think your outlines, we've had practice writing outlines this semester. You've had 3 chances to write a good outline. So at this point, you should know how to construct one. Or if you've seen my feedback, you should understand like what it should look like. Okay. So that is the paper topic. And then we'll talk about, you see on here, the last 2 assignments. You've got your reading response number 6. This is basically choosing 2 plays and answering questions about them in terms of modern theater. So we're rounding out our theater chapters. The last reading response, what is going on here? Yeah, the last reading response here, basically, somebody's already submitted a grade for it, is basically talking about the last reading response. We're talking about plays, and this one is doing the exact same thing, except the last reading response, what I was trying to say is it was talking about Greek theater and Shakespeare. This is talking about modern plays. So again, don't feel like you have to pick a really long play for this assignment. You could pick 2 pretty short plays. One of them could even be your topic of paper 3. I'm going to go ahead and change that because it can be plays that you're using for paper 3. All right, so I am going to change that. So you can use paper 3 topics for this if you want to. All right, but that I think will be our last reading response. So fun times. And then this is the discussion forum for this week. This is evaluating the revisionist history, Mary Poppins, and Saving Mr. Banks. So this video is a little bit longer, so you might want to watch it towards the beginning of the week. It's like 20 minutes or so, but it's talking about revisionist history. And if you don't know what revisionist history is, I don't want to explain it exactly because that's the first question of the discussion forum, but it is something that happens quite a lot in literature, and it's pretty important. I had a student last semester that was like, why is this important? I'm like, well, revisionist history can be dangerous. And so we need to talk about it because it's something that kind of creeps me out. And we can talk about it in the discussion forum, but she kind of explains it in this video. Are there any benefits to revisionist history? I do think there is some pros and cons to this concept, and questions 1 and 2 kind of ask for that. And then the reason I chose this video primarily is because it's basically a version of our paper number 4 that's been converted into a video. She basically wrote out a script, kind of like a research paper that's very similar to our paper number 4, and made it into this video. So she's talking about the movie Revisiting Saving Mr. Banks, which is adapted from the Mary Poppins series. So it's kind of like that third option we talked about, where you talk about how different books and stuff can be adapted to film. That's sort of what this video is doing. And so I thought it was a really good example of paper 4, and I'm curious to know what you can take from her video and how she organized it and apply it to your own paper. All right. So that is the discussion forum. So finally, the last thing I want to talk about is our MLA citation presentation. All right. And so this presentation, I've made it years ago. I update it just to keep MLA up to date on it, but it's really helping you to know how to pick the right sources and cite in MLA format. So you don't have to read this entire presentation. Some of these slides are talking about how to pick credible sources. They talk about bias with sources. You can actually use, I would argue that any source has bias in it. I know that we have like the concept of fake news and all that, and it's such like a cliche term at this point. But in all honesty, anytime someone writes something, unless it's like a math fact or something scientific that has data to represent it, any type of report or article has an instinctual bias to it. It's just how we are as writers. We take our own common knowledge and we apply it to the writing that we do. And so our experience and our own feelings are translated into that writing. So I'm not saying you can't use an article because you think it might be biased, but what you need to do is be transparent. The main thing is you don't want to trick your reader. You want to tell your reader, if there's bias in an article, here's what it is. And I realize that, I'm self-aware, and I'm telling you so you know, but here's why I chose it as well. So for example, if I was writing a paper and I knew my source had bias, I could say something like this. Although Jernigan's writing has been labeled as highly conservative by the New York Times, I feel he still makes a valid point about immigration reform and one that needs to be explored further. And then here's my in-text citation. So as long as you're upfront and transparent with your audience, it's fine, as long as you don't keep them like in the dark about your research. Site credibility, there's a slide talking about that. Again, do not use Wikipedia, WikiHows, Ask.com. They're not credible. Anybody can create an account and edit these sources. It may take days, weeks, or months for moderators to clean up information from it. The story I always told in class was that when I was in college, I had a friend named Jairus Bellamy, and Jairus and I were in the same English class together, and we had an instructor tell us, don't use Wikipedia. And what he did was that he went to Frank Sinatra's Wikipedia page, and at the time you could just log on and edit it, and he edited it to say that he was Frank Sinatra's spiritual advisor, and that he gave Frank Sinatra's eulogy, which is utter BS. So what happened was it took the bots on Wikipedia's page a while to find this out and change it. But by the time they had changed the information, there were other sites citing Jairus as the spiritual advisor of Frank Sinatra. You can still go find YouTube videos arguing this. You can find accounts online. If you look up Jairus Bellamy, Jairus Bellamy, Bellamy, and spiritual advisor to Frank Sinatra, there are still pages citing him. And it's 100% false. He just put that information on there as a joke. So for that reason, I'm like, don't use Wikipedia as a source, because you don't know if the information you're getting is accurate. Anybody can edit it. It's not a good option. Now, a good way to tell credibility with your URLs is to look at what they end in. If it ends in .edu or .gov, I would treat that as pretty factual or as being credible, because there are repercussions for those people and organizations creating that information and putting it online. If it's from a .org, it's a little bit more credible than a .com or a .net, but .orgs can still be sketchy. Like I saw like a Bigfoot Anonymous .org once, and I was like, well, we call that credible. But if it's a .com or a .net site, be wary. Like that .com means commercial and .net means network. Those are sites that anybody can purchase. I could purchase a .com site and put whatever information I want on there, whether it's true or not, and pass it off as legit. The only reason I would say a .com site is credible is if it's from like an organization like the American Psychological Organization, or a lot of hospital sites use .coms because they're more commercial and easier to afford. So there's that. But just be wary as you research, okay? And then there's questions you can ask to determine your site credibility, facts versus testimonies. Kairos is timeliness. Ideally, you don't want to choose a source that's over 5 years old unless it's like super prime background basic information. And so then we get into the meat of this. So MLA. MLA has two parts. It has in-text citations and a works cited page. And so your in-text citations just show me, the reader, where you can locate information. Like if I'm reading your paper and I see you quote something I really like, that in-text citation will tell me which source on the works cited page it corresponds with. And then your works cited page is just a list of your sources that you've used. Now, a lot of people think in-text citations are hard. They are not. They're actually very easy. You only have two options really with in-text citations. The first is if it's a digital source, you're just going to mainly use the web URL. So like ilstu.edu, right? If it's a print, you're going to use the author's last name. So if it's a print source, you're either going to do the author's last name and a page number, or the title of the book and a page number. That's it. You could even use just the page number. It's pretty simple. That's in-text citations. They go at the end of sentences. If you cite a source multiple times in a paragraph, then just do one in-text citation at the end of that paragraph, and that should cover it. The only exception is if you cite multiple sources within a paragraph, then you have to differentiate, okay, where am I citing what? And then with digital sources, it's even easier. It's either the URL, like nytimes.com, or it's the author's last name. There are no page numbers for online sites, so it's pretty easy. Like that's even easier, like just the author's last name. If you don't have a last name of an author, just do the basic web URL. That's it. That's all you have to do. That's in-text citations. Easiest thing in the world. Students always think it's really hard. I'm like, nah, as long as you go through and any paragraph you cite information, just include that in text at the end, you're covered. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So then you have your works cited page. And so far, a lot of you have done really good with this, but for those of you that are still struggling, I do want to kind of review MLA and then before we get done with this video, because I know it's running a lot longer than our usual videos. But basically, there is a formula for a works cited page, and we'll get to it. If you need to know whether you need to use italics or quotation marks, this slide will tell you that. But the basics are, this is the basic formula for MLA. And all we do is tweak it depending on the type of source it is. So you always have the author's last name, comma, first name, the title in quotation marks, the publisher, and the date. That is the base formula, as basic as we get. But depending on what type of source you're dealing with, that will depend on how this looks. So if I'm using books, for example, I will do author last name, first name, the book title is in italics, the publisher, and the year of publication. It's all I need. So I can just put Smith, comma, John, a day to remember, Penguin Press, 2012. That is it. That's all I need for the book. That's it. Super easy. So then for a web page or an online article, you still have your author last name, comma, author first name. Your title is now in quotation marks because it's a smaller piece of work. And then your web URL, like your basic website, is going to be in italics, then the web publisher, the date, and the link. So if I have Murphy, comma, Tanya, immigration reform on the forefront is my title. Then I have the web URL in italics, and then the web publisher. Now, this is the only part that really confuses students, because a lot of students have told me, but the New York Times is the online URL and it's the publisher. Do I have to put both? Yes, because they are a little bit different. Like you can notice this says NY Times and this says the New York Times online. They are a little bit different, and some of your sources will be different as far as the URL versus the publisher. But just do that. your date it was published, and then the link. That's it. And then as far as how you do dates, you always do like day and then month and then year. It's kind of like military time. Just make sure if you have a long date, you shorten it to like September, SEPT, and that's it. And then journals are probably the hardest to cite because they have more parts, but they're not crazy. So you still have like the author's last name and first name. Then you have the title of the article. You have the journal that it's in italics. The only thing with journal articles that is different is when you get to this part here, you'll put the volume and issue, if it's available, the year published, and then the pages that you're citing. That's it. I mean, it can be a little bit harder because you've got to look up this extra information, but with a journal, that info should be pretty easy to find. And then if you have any other questions about MLA, there's always Purdue's website. It's Purdue OWL. Purdue University, they have an amazing English department, and their English department kind of heads up all of the MLA updates and things on that website. So you can always look there to see different ways to cite things, if that's helpful. But yeah, so if you have questions about MLA, you will get to peer review your papers, and if you include your works cited page, I will peer review and give you feedback on your works cited page in week 7's assignment. So as far as module 6 goes, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week to talk about module 7 of English 122. Bye.